Hi, I'm Laura,
And I'm Joe.
and this is CrimeDivers.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode.
Hello everyone, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for joining us once again.
So Jill, where in the world are we today?
We're in America.
And what is your title?
Stolen from a sleepover.
Okay, shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's dive in. So, Polly Hannah Klaas was born on the 3rd of January 1981 in Fairfax, California. Her mum was Eve Nickel and her dad was Mark Klaas, and they had divorced when Polly was 2. So Eve got married to a man called Alan Nickel, and they had a daughter together called Annie. At the time of this case, which was 1993, Polly was 12, and she was living with just her mum and Annie, as her mum and stepdad had split up by now.
Right, okay.
So Polly would see her dad Mark regularly. They had a great relationship. You know, they spoke on the phone most days, and they would spend most weekends together as well. Polly was described by one of her teachers as a bright, pretty, and with as bright, pretty, and with a sassy style of her own. She excelled in her studies and she made friends quickly when she had moved schools. Polly loved acting and would take part in school plays, and you know, she was just loving life.
Yeah.
You know, typical child, just 12 years old, loving life. So, Friday the 1st of October 1993, Polly was having a sleepover at her house with two friends, Gillian Pelham and Kate McLean. So by 8:30, both of her friends had arrived, and the three girls were excited. They were going to try on Halloween costumes because it was the start of October. There was ice cream in the freezer. They decided they were going to stay up like all night long, like they were just, you know, just going to have a good time.
Yeah, like sleepovers should be.
Yeah. So the girls were in Polly's bedroom, but they must have been quite noisy. And at 9:45 p.m, Polly's mum Eve went into the bedroom and asked them if they could keep it down a bit. She had a migraine and she was going to bed for an early night. So her bedroom was right across the hall from Polly's, and like she knew it probably wouldn't take long for them to get noise again, but she was like, do you know what, I need to sleep. I know how you feel. We've got a migraine.
Yeah.
Sleep is the best thing. So she
Absolutely.
took her prescription pills. She took them and she fell asleep. I think she actually had Annie in with her as well, Polly's little sister.
Right,
I think
okay.
she had her in with her as well. So they went to bed. So the three girls, they carried on they were trying on like makeup, like Halloween makeup, and as I said, like they were just trying to figure out what they were going to dress up for Halloween.
Yeah.
Until about 10:30 p.m. when Polly decided to go and get the sleeping bags from another room. So she opened her bedroom door, and a man was just standing there with a knife in his hand,
Oh God.
and he was carrying a duffel bag. I know, can you imagine?
Wow.
Like, you're 12 years old with your two friends here, you're enjoying yourself,
You're in your own home?
you're in your own home where you feel the safest. You just open your bedroom door, and there's a man standing there.
I think I would scream.
Yeah, well, I actually said, because John was away, and the day that I was doing this case, and he phoned me just to, you know, catch up with the day, say goodnight, and I was telling him about it, and of course I was in the house by myself, and he's like, you better shut the bedroom door. So I was like, actually, do you know what, I'm not going to, and I did not shut my bedroom door that night, because I just thought, what if I need to get up during the night, and I open that, I'll be scared to open the door in case there's a man on the other
Could have
side.
still been standing there without the door.
Well, yeah, but that's, it just made me think about
Yeah.
how scary that must have been for
I know.
especially for a child.
Exactly. That would. Well, I mean, obviously it
It was scary for anybody.
Yeah, of course. I would hate that because
Oh,
you know, in your own house, you feel you should feel safe, shouldn't you?
of course.
You should be locked up for the night, and you know, you shouldn't have to worry about something like that happening. But
I know. Honestly, I just thought that must be horrendous. So, at first, the other two girls, Gillian and Kate, they thought it was a joke. They didn't see the knife at first, so they just thought this was someone that Polly knew that they didn't, and they like set up for, because it was so close to Halloween. She
Yeah.
just thought, oh, they've set this up for her uncle or you know, somebody like that, or a mum's boyfriend or something, and he's going to come in and scare us, and it's just you know.
but shit, because you wouldn't believe it's something
No,
sinister,
of course
would
you
you?
wouldn't. But he walked into the room and he told them if they screamed, he was going to slit their throats. So that's when they realised, shit,
Well,
you know, this is real. So he tied the girls up And he asked which girl lived there, and he wanted to know who else was in the house. So obviously Polly told him that she lived there, and he said, right, okay, I'm not going to hurt anyone, I'm only here for money. But when Polly told him that there was some cash hidden in a jewellery box, like, he made no attempt to go and find it. So it was like, okay.
Well, yeah, if you're here for money, why aren't you going to
Why?
take that?
Yeah, I'm telling you where there is money, why are you not going to get it? So he gagged the two other girls, and he took pillowcases off the pillows, like, to put over their head, so, like, it's a hood kind of thing,
right,
so they couldn't see.
Uh-huh.
He then grabbed Polly and pulled her to her feet, and he told Gillian and Kate to count to 1,000, and by the time they were done, Polly would be back.
Okay.
So he then took Polly out of the room and out of the house, and she didn't come back. Gillian and Kate, they managed to free themselves, so they ran to Eve's room, you know, Polly's mum, to wake her up. And as they had thought, you know, Eve also thought it was a joke. She's like, oh, the girls are just trying to scare me, you know.
Just messing around.
Yeah, totally understandable, but, you know, when you've got a migraine, I don't think she'd have been very happy about it. But, you know, she kind of woke herself up a bit and realised, no.
Something's happened.
Yeah, I'll need to phone the police. So she called the police, and talking to the dispatcher, she sounded disorientated and uncertain. They said later that her voice finally rose with anxiety and turned hoarse as she seemed to realise that her daughter was really gone. Because I think, as I said, she was half asleep when she's took migraine pills.
Yeah. So
she's been asleep, so she's obviously, it's took her a bit to kind of come to.
Yeah.
So according to the LA Times, she said, apparently a man just broke into our house and took my daughter. I just woke up and two girls here spent the night with my daughter. She was 12 and a half, and then there it was that her voice grew more desperate as she responded to the dispatcher's questions. And she said, she's not here, I didn't even hear anything, I was asleep. So can you imagine, for her as a mother,
I know,
not hearing anything?
I know, but I suppose if she's taking the migraine tablets, then that could have put her in quite a deep sleep. And
but I mean, even without the migraine tablets, you know, some people sleep. I mean, the girls never heard them. I mean, I suppose they would have been making a bit of noise probably, but you know, it's easy enough to sneak into somebody's house and without people hearing you.
Very true.
So the dispatcher asked to speak to one of the girls. So Kate took the phone and spoke to them, and she said, he took Polly away. We heard the screen door bang shut. She described what the kidnapper had done, and she was actually quite calm to start off with, but then when she started telling the dispatcher how her hands had started to swell and that her hands were sore, she started getting really upset, and she just wanted to talk to her mum.
Yeah, of course.
And I was like, oh, bless her. So the police arrived really quickly, and they went into Polly's room. The room was in disarray, and on the floor were cut up strips of cloth and a bag strap. You know how you get the handbags that have you can unclip it, you can unclip the strap.
Yeah.
So that was lying on the floor. Also, the cords of a Nintendo console had been cut, so I'm assuming these were all used to tie the girls up.
Right, okay, yeah.
So he had obviously brought his own strips of cloth, so he was prepared, but remember when he came, he asked who else was in the house. He obviously didn't know who else was there, and he wasn't expecting maybe the three girls to be there, and he needed more things to tie them up with.
Right, okay.
So Detective Mike Meese said that what he saw wasn't encouraging. He said that he remembered standing at the door to Polly's room and looking at the few bags of evidence that they'd been able to collect and thinking that it was just such a pitiful amount. And he looked down at the rug and he talked to his partner, Larry Pelton, and he said, let's take the rug. And Larry asked why, and Mike just said he didn't know why, but he just wanted to take the rug. So as they didn't have enough evidence, so they took the rug.
Fair enough.
The police were in desperate need of assistance, and they asked for the help from the FBI. And agents appeared at Polly's house shortly after midnight. So Special Agent Ed Fryer became the lead investigator, as he was familiar with the community. He was experienced in kidnapping cases. Surprisingly, a vast majority of kidnappings involved disgruntled family members. So the first place that they looked was Polly's dad, Mark, because obviously parents divorced.
Of course, yeah.
But he was cleared of any responsibility, like, pretty much straight away. And the FBI were pretty sure it wasn't a family member anyway, but obviously they have to rule everybody out.
Of course, yeah.
So the case had all the earmarks of a stranger abduction case, going by the two girls' statements. He said that stranger abduction cases are the hardest cases to solve because there's no connection between the perpetrator of the crime and the victim, or the victim's family, or even somebody even associated to the victim, because obviously if it's a family member or somebody known to them, you can get kind of establish a connection.
There's like a reason why.
Yeah. So abductions involving total strangers are really rare and don't leave investigators very much to go on. In this case, though, there were obviously witnesses. So a police sketch artist was called in, and for 2 hours, Gillian and Kate tried to remember the face of Polly's kidnapper. Obviously, they were still really upset, and in shock, but they did really well, and they managed to give the artist a pretty good description.
Mm-hmm.
So authorities had an idea of what the kidnapper looked like, and it was now after 4 a.m. So the girls were taken to the police station, and the FBI called in one of its special forces, the Evidence Response Team. Tony Maxwell, who led the crew, said, quote, "In looking at cases across the United States, we have found that when somebody is kidnapped, especially a young child, that they will generally be harmed within the first 24 hours, and probably within the first couple of days they could even be killed."
Mm-hmm.
So time is of the essence. In that kind of work, the investigators need to move quickly, end quote. So the evidence response team is designed to provide forensic resources at a major crime scene. So their sole responsibility is to collect evidence as they use the most sophisticated collecting equipment available to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So an electrostatic dust print machine collects tiny hairs and fibres off the floor when a positive charge is passed over a sheet of mylar. So basically, it's a sheet of polyester film and they put it on the floor, and then they roll this roller thing over it, and any loose debris will cling to the sheet.
Okay, yeah.
So whatever is collected would be sent to the lab. Like, the police department doesn't have this kind of technology.
Yeah.
So, and although the police department had already dusted for fingerprints, they'd actually come up with nothing particularly promising. But as I just said, they didn't have access to the same equipment as the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
So they had way more sophisticated equipment that could pick up things that the police had missed. And they actually found 4 dozen fingerprints.
Wow.
The police had been unable to see using conventional equipment.
Uh-huh.
But unfortunately, they turned out to be no good, and they were matched to family or friends. But it just goes to show. So why haven't the police got this equipment?
Well, I know, yeah. I mean,
I don't understand that.
Why can't they all have roughly the same sort of stuff? Because then, well, they could do their jobs and wouldn't need the FBI.
Yeah, it's just strange, isn't it?
The FBI need jobs too, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
but that just seems like that sounds basic to me. Like, for fingerprints, that's like a basic thing. I can understand if it was something more complicated that they were looking for that maybe they couldn't have, but fingerprints surely is one of the first bits of evidence you try and find in that sort of case to match somebody to like to get DNA and stuff.
That's what I mean. Like, for them to find nothing, the police, and then the FBI come along and find 4 dozen.
Yeah, like they should have
that equipment then, shouldn't they?
Something that allows them to do that.
Because it's not just child abduction cases that need fingerprints for it. It's all sorts of murders and crimes and thefts and whatever. So, after hours of meticulous searching, something finally turned up. A palm print which was on Polly's bed, like on a crossbar on the bed. So he must have, like, the abductor, he must have just put his hand there for a second to sort of lean on it.
Right.
Maybe when he was getting the pillows or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So they found the palm print, so that got sent off to the lab as well. So by dawn the following day, more than 100 agents and officers had begun a 24-hour search for Polly and her abductor. Helicopters and bloodhounds had been called out, and an all-points bulletin, which is when a radio message is sent to every officer in a police force, was issued by local authorities and the FBI. So every house in the neighbourhood was searched. Agents went to Polly's school to talk to teachers and students in the hopes that someone might have some useful information.
Mm-hmm.
Investigators canvassed the neighbourhood in pairs, asking everyone if they'd seen anything suspicious that night. One by one, they interviewed all of Polly's neighbours, and several people remembered seeing a stranger around the neighbourhood that fit the description given by Gillian and Kate.
Right.
So a boy called Thomas, he had been, about 9 p.m. that night, he had been walking to the video shop. I just thought, the video shop, that brings back memories.
Oh, yeah.
I used to love Blockbuster.
I used to work for them.
I know, but just like, because we didn't have all these streaming services and everything, and all these channels on Sky and whatnot, like, it was a treat to go, let's go to the video, let's go and rent a video or later on a DVD.
totally.
You know, that was a total treat. We'll get some munchies.
I know, it was a fun Friday night.
It was, wasn't it? But now it's just like, oh, just see what's on the telly.
Yeah. see what I can stream live.
Yeah.
Straight away, download on demand.
It's not the same, is it?
No, sadly not.
And you used to have good munchies at Blockbuster.
I know, good popcorn and chocolate, and yeah, I remember.
Because I used to come and you'd give me a discount when I came and got them for you.
Definitely.
Yeah, so this boy Thomas, so he'd been walking at the video shop with his friends, and he saw a stranger standing in the shadows in front of Polly's house. Thomas said he knew everybody in the neighbourhood, even just if it was just to look at, he knew everybody.
Yeah.
And he said he had never seen this man before. They carried on to the video shop, and when they came back the same way, heading home, and they noticed that the stranger was still standing there, and the description that Thomas gave to authorities matched the suspect that they were looking for. There was also a guy called Sean Bush. He lived in a rental cottage which was behind Polly's house, and he was playing video games with friends that night, and at about 10:30 p.m. he just happened to glance out the window and he saw a strange man on the back porch of Polly's house, and he got up to have a better look, and his description also matched the suspect. Unfortunately, nobody sort of phoned anything in because...
Again, it's one of those don't believe it's happening to you sort of thing.
And he wasn't doing anything, he was just, he was sort of hanging around, but I don't think, I would think, if I just seen somebody sort of just hanging around, I wouldn't think to phone the police, because there might be a perfectly good reason for them to be standing, maybe not on somebody's back porch, but I mean, I don't know. I just always think there's a rational explanation for something.
Exactly. I think if I glanced out the window and seen somebody, I would just maybe think, oh, it's something to do with the family. Maybe they know them. Maybe it's just...
Maybe they're a visitor. Maybe they've stepped outside to have a cigarette.
Well, exactly, I mean, I suppose I wouldn't automatically think, oh, I better phone the police.
Exactly. So you can't blame anybody for not calling the police, because, as I said, he was hanging about. He was a bit of a stranger, but he wasn't technically really doing anything, was he? He was
at that point,
So... After the FBI had ruled out all family and friends as suspects, they started looking at sex offenders throughout the county, and then they branched out to surrounding counties and questioned every person on the sex offenders register, but they came up with nothing. The following day, the search for Polly had turned into the largest manhunt in the nation. A massive community volunteer network was formed to assist authorities. Hundreds of citizens searched, others passed out flyers. They were just all trying to cover the entire city as quickly as possible. So at the FBI's lab in Washington, D.C., forensic expert Chris Allen examined the items collected from Polly's house. He found that fibres taken from the carpet in her room had come from the carpet of a car. So he suspected that these carpet fibres were most likely from the kidnapper's car, because he eliminated sort of the family members' cars, her mum and her dad and whatever. The strips of fabric that had tied Gillian and Kate's hands were found to have come from the same item, and it looked like a woman's nightie, and it's been cut up into strips. And remember how the detective had taken the rug? Well, Chris Allen found a forcibly removed dark brown head hair. So he knew it was forcibly removed because there was actually a bit of scalp on it. But at the moment it was of no use to them, because they didn't have a suspect to compare it to. So it's all very well getting palm prints and all the other stuff, but they had nothing to compare it to. So that basically everyone was just sort of filed until they found a suspect, and then they would be able to compare everything. So 48 hours after Polly was taken, her dad, Mark Klaas, he got a phone call. He said it sounded like Polly, and she told him that she was in a hotel room somewhere, and that her abductor had just stepped out for a moment. But then the line went dead. So he just assumed that the abductor came back in. So unfortunately there hadn't been, they hadn't put a trace thing on his phone. So there wasn't anything they could do except set one up and hopefully, that she would phone again. And she did. And she stayed on the phone for long enough for authorities to make a trace. So they traced the call to a house 30 miles away. There hadn't been time to get a big team together, so just a few agents just went there. They burst into the house, get down on the ground, But something wasn't right. This was just a normal family home. The mum and dad, there was kids, there was no sign of Polly or her abductor. Well, it turns out that the shithead daughter of the family confessed that it had been her. Friends at school had dared her to call and impersonate Polly, so it had just been a cruel joke.
That's
Imagine phoning her own dad.
But then...
And he said it sounded like Polly.
I was just going to say, because how did he not realise it wasn't her?
Well, it must have sounded awfully like her, or maybe he was that desperate. Maybe she did sound slightly like her, but because he'd obviously be that desperate to hear from her, then maybe. But who does that?
That's awful.
And to her dad as well. I mean, it's not even like, oh, phone the hotline, like the police or something like that. It's like, phone this kid's dad.
That's awful.
Absolutely awful.
Was it just that time, or was it her the first time?
The two times.
The two times,
yeah, it was her. That's awful, isn't it?
That's really sick. I hope she got some kind of punishment for that.
Well, I would hope so, but I don't know. If that, I mean, hopefully if the police didn't do anything, hopefully the parents would have done something.
I'd be mortified.
But the police could have charged her with like impersonation
or
something like that. Surely wasting police time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Something, but
so in mid-October, so it must have been a couple of weeks after Polly's abduction, Kate and Gillian were asked for another description of the man who tied them up, and a highly acclaimed forensic artist was flown in to make a second sketch. So obviously this guy was a lot more experienced than the first person.
Yeah.
And the girls were, obviously they were less stressed this time round because it had only just happened the first time.
Of course.
So they were actually able to give the artist more to work with. So the second sketch was much more precise than what the first one was.
Mm-hmm.
So new flyers were distributed immediately, and a reward was also offered for Polly's safe return. And this reward was $200,000, and it was actually Winona Ryder, the actress.
Yeah.
It was actually her who offered it because she grew up in the same town as Polly.
Oh wow.
So, she obviously felt some kind of connection to her, and it was her that put up the reward.
Oh wow.
I thought, how nice is that for a celebrity to do something like that, isn't
Definitely,
it? Definitely, yeah. While after that, the authorities received a call demanding a $10,000 ransom. And they traced the call to an apartment, and a SWAT team showed up and stormed in the front door again. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it was another hoax. A 20-year-old guy called James Hurd, he was arrested for attempting extortion and posing as a kidnapper. He just wanted $10,000.
Did he not realise that... I mean, I'm no expert, but when I watch these films and the ransoms get asked, the police normally set things up and they pretend that they're going along to pay the ransom, but then they just set them up to get arrested. So does people not realise that?
I've never seen it work in a film.
No, I know, that's what I mean. I'm like, seriously? Like, you must know there's a good chance that you're going to get caught or arrested.
No, but at least he got arrested, so... Mm-hmm. But, I mean, people who do things like this is just trying to profit or making a joke out of people's... real abductions or deaths or whatever the case may be, other people's heartbreak.
Exactly. At the end of the day, that could easily be them or their loved ones. So why would you even dare think about that?
You've got to be sick in the head to be thinking things like that, haven't you?
Totally.
So a letter that Polly's parents had written to the kidnapper was published on the 17th of October in the San Francisco Examiner. Part of it said, "Whoever you are, wherever you are, please return Polly to her family. She belongs here. We miss Polly so much. We miss the twinkle in her eye and her sweet humour. We long to see her beautiful smile and hear her musical voice." And they also addressed Polly, saying, "Our darling, if you can read this, please know that your mummy and daddy love you so much, and we will continue to search for you until we can hold you safely in our loving arms again."
Aww, that's so
I know, imagine having to write that.
I know, that's heartbreaking.
Across the country, people, obviously, everybody wanted to see Polly brought, most people want to see Polly brought home, apart from the horrendous people who are hoaxing their parents and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there were banners put up, there was candlelight vigils were held, like thousands wore ribbons of lavender because that was Polly's favourite colour, just to show their support, of the search. And the search never stopped. They had a 24-hour-a-day operation. Navy and rescue experts joined the thousands of volunteers who were constantly looking for Polly. Police and volunteer task forces worked tirelessly, but it wasn't until the 28th of November 1993, so that's 2 months after she was abducted, that the authorities got their first real lead. So the sheriff's deputy was called out to the house of Dana Jaffe, and her house was 20 miles away from Polly's house. Mm-hmm. So at the end of she had like a big long winding drive, and she had like land with like a wooded area and everything like that. So she'd been out inspecting her property and she noticed something unusual, so she thought, I better phone the police. So she led the deputy through a densely wooded area to a clearing just a few yards from the winding drive to her house. Scattered in the woods were a few items that seemed suspicious. So there was like a large piece of silk cloth that had been fashioned into what appeared to be a hood, and a couple of strips of packing tape were found on the ground. There was also a pair of young girl's tights that had been tied into a knot, and human hair was tangled up in the knot. I think there was a few other little bits and pieces as well.
Okay.
So Dana told the deputy about one night she had caught a trespasser on her property, not far from where they were standing. It had been nearly 2 months before, and Dana's babysitter, Shannon Lynch, had left Dana's house and was making her way down the long driveway, and she saw a man walking down the middle of the private drive, and she could see that his car was sort of off to the side. So Shannon stopped, and he was like wound her window down, and he told her that he was stuck and insisted that she get out of her car to help, and she was like, I think I'll pass. And he also wanted to know what was at the top of the drive, because it was a really long drive, so you couldn't actually see, what was at the top of it.
Right.
But Shannon immediately, she was like, nah, something's not right here. I'm not getting out of my car.
Good.
And she wound the window up and away she drove off. So she stopped as soon as she found a payphone.
Right.
Which is about 2 miles away, and she called Dana to tell her that there was like this scary man trespassing on her land.
God, that would be quite... I'd hate to get that phone call as well.
Well, Dana was obviously a bit of a badass because she didn't waste any time. She grabbed her daughter, chucked her in the car, grabbed a baseball bat, and drove down the driveway.
Oh, wow.
So she saw the man's car, but the man was nowhere to be seen.
Right.
So she continued down, sort of looking for him, and she ended up in town. So, and she didn't see him, so she went to the nearest payphone, and she called the police. So just after midnight, 2 police officers showed up, and Dana told them that she didn't really want the intruder arrested for trespassing. She just wanted him off her property. He hadn't done anything. Just tell him he's not allowed to.
Yeah.
So the officers found the man, and he seemed a bit agitated. They could smell alcohol in his breath, and he was sweating profusely. Same. Heat wave.
Yeah.
Absolutely soaking with sweat. So there were bits of like leaves in his hair, and it just looked like he'd been like rolling around on the ground. So the man told the officers that he had been out sightseeing. It's dark.
Yeah.
By the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, he'd been out sightseeing.
Right.
When he realised that he was on private property. So he was always like, oh shit, I'm on private property, I better turn round and go back. But when he tried to turn round, his car got stuck like in a sort of ditch at the side of the road.
Right.
So he said that he'd been under the car trying to free it, which is why it looked like he'd been rolling around on the ground.
Okay. Which...
Yeah.
Well, maybe.
I don't know if I'd be under the car.
No, I'd probably be pushing the car,
Yeah,
but I mean, okay.
Okay, that's what he said.
Yeah, okay.
But the officers didn't believe him, as the car was trapped. The way the car was trapped, there wasn't enough room, because I said it was in a ditch, so there must have been like a sort of high bit, so there wasn't actually enough room for a person to get underneath.
Right, okay.
So they give the man like the sobriety test, and it passed. They looked in the car, they saw some cans of beer in a plastic bag and a small duffel bag in the back seat. So when they asked him if he'd been drinking, he actually grabbed one of the cans of beer and just opened it and started drinking it.
Okay.
So they were like, don't think so. They grabbed the can off him and poured it out. And they told him that they wanted to pat him down. He became extremely upset and told them to get away from him. To make him comply, though, the officers said that they were quite within their rights to take him in for trespassing. So he was like, all right, okay. So he calmed down. They searched him. Didn't find anything, so I don't know why he was so agitated. And they continued asking him questions, but they didn't find anything incriminating. So the officers were still a bit suspicious of him, and they ran his license plate, but it was fine. Like, there was his driver's record was clean. So he passed the sobriety test, so they couldn't detain him any longer. So they pulled his car out,
right,
sent him on his way. So this turned out that this had actually been the night that Polly had been abducted.
Right, okay.
So after finding the hood, the tape and the tights on Dana's property, the deputy knew this is too much a coincidence, like for it not to be connected to Polly's abduction. So they put in a call to the police department, and within an hour, Detective Mike Meese and Agent Ed Fryer arrived to check it out. So after the evidence was collected, investigators immediately began searching the area for any signs of Polly. The search took days, with over 300 volunteers, 25 to 30 search dogs, and they were still in the hope that Polly was alive. They were still looking for her to be alive.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, authorities looked out the full report of the incident that had happened on Dana's property, because because it was like 20 miles away, it would have been different police stations that had dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Dana wouldn't have thought, I'm sure she didn't think anything about it, but I mean, she probably heard that a child had been abducted.
Yeah, but she probably didn't think it was connected.
But probably not, because it was 20 miles away. I mean, if you think about where we are to 20 miles away, say maybe up in Edinburgh, if a child was abducted and we saw a strange man on our property here, we would never connect those two together, would we?
No,
so that's totally understandable. Yeah, so the authorities looked at the full report of the incident that had happened on Dana's property, and they found the man whose car had been stuck was called Richard Allen Davis. His criminal record showed that he had recently been paroled from an 8-year sentence for kidnapping.
Mm-hmm.
His other crimes were in 1976, he was arrested for robbery, kidnapping and assault with intent to commit rape.
Right.
In 1978, he had been arrested for another kidnapping as well as a couple of counts of assault with a deadly weapon. In 1984, he had been arrested for kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, including the use of a firearm, and armed robbery. The arrest photo on file matched the girl's description, and also his mum lived in the same neighbourhood as Polly, so he had reason to be in that neighbourhood.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the items found on Dana's property had been immediately phoned to forensic specialist Chris Allen in Washington, D.C., and of the most interest was a strip of cloth that was found in the woods, as he confirmed that the material fit like a puzzle to the other pieces. Remember I said they were like Filmman's 90? And that, it was they fit like a puzzle, so obviously they were all taken from the same
90.
The same 90. Or the same item. They
Yeah.
thought it was a 90.
Yeah.
So police didn't have enough to arrest him for kidnapping, but they felt if they could just get him into custody, they might be able to get something out of him. So they found that David had an outstanding warrant for breaking parole.
Right.
So they decided to bring him in. But he wasn't at home when they arrived. Luckily though, just by chance at the same time, a deputy sheriff was securing a perimeter around the area at Dana's. And he stopped a van, and the van at the wheel was Richard Allen Davis.
Right.
So obviously the deputy knew who it was, so he called it into the investigators who were still at Davis's house looking for him. So that he was like, right, took the keys out of the van, you can just stay where you are, mister. So the other officers arrived and arrested him for a violation of his parole. I think it was for like a DUI or something like that.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
No.
And he was taken to the police station. So Gillian and Kate were also brought in, the little girls, and they picked him out of a lineup straight away. They're like, yep, that's definitely him. So he was questioned about the kidnapping, and of course he denied any involvement. So one day, Agent Ed Fryer got a call from the fingerprint expert saying they had matched Davis's palm print to the one on Polly's bed, so they could finally place him in Polly's room.
Yeah.
So though news about the palm print was made public, Davis was being held in isolation, so he actually didn't know that.
Right, okay.
So he had a friend visit him, and the friend advised Davis to talk to authorities and tell him where Polly was. But Davis was still like, no, I don't know what's wrong with you, it wasn't me, blah, blah, blah. But the friend like showed him the newspaper, and he's like, look,
they know it's
they know. So Davis was like, oh shit. But he now realised it was going to be impossible to sort of explain it away. You know, his palm print was in Polly's bedroom, so he was going to have to talk.
The game's up.
Yeah. So he said that he would only speak to Detective Meese, and he was paged and Detective Meese was paged to call the jail. So he called the jail, and Davis came on the line, and he said, I screwed up big time. So Detective Meese was like, okay, I'll be there in a minute. You just hold on.
Yeah.
He's willing to talk. We need to get there.
Absolutely.
So him and Special Agent Larry Taylor went to the jail, and Davis told them what happened on the night of the 1st of October. So this is his
version.
Yeah.
Events.
So he was living in a halfway house, because remember he was on parole. But he had applied for an overnight pass to go and visit his mum. But when he got to that neighbourhood, he couldn't find his mum's house. So I'm assuming that while he was in jail, his mum must have moved or something like that. So that's why he hasn't been to his mum's house before. So he couldn't find it.
Right, okay.
So he had a few beers, and he just like walked around the streets of the neighbourhood. At one point, he was stopped by a man who was selling marijuana, so he bought a joint off of him. So he said that he got really buzzed, and he went to the store for more beer, and then he just wandered around. He wasn't sure where he was or what he was doing.
Okay.
So even though what he says sounds believable, like, yeah, he turned up to go and see his mum, couldn't find his mum's house, but he actually had come prepared. So, you know, he had brought a bag, and it had bindings and tape in it. So if
Yeah.
you're just going to visit your mum, why have you got that in your car?
Mm-hmm.
So, and forensics could tell that he had cut the strips of the nightie or whatever the item was with scissors. So that's a fact which implies intent.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a fact of like, oh, I'm going to grab something and rip it. This has been carefully, this has been cut.
Absolutely.
So that's intent. So obviously he wasn't planning on just visiting his mum. He was planning to go and kidnap somebody.
Absolutely.
He was just waiting for an opportunity to arrive, wasn't he?
Totally.
So he then said that he picked a house at random and crawled into an open window. He said he could hear voices and he may have picked up a knife from the kitchen. He did, because it was the knife that he had was from Polly's kitchen.
Yeah.
But he may have picked up.
Oh, okay.
And he said that he didn't remember anything after that.
Right, okay.
So he claimed that the next thing he knew was that he was driving his car and that he was surprised to find a young girl sitting next to him. So he was walking into somebody's house, crawling in a window at somebody's house in the kitchen, and then the next thing he was in his car with a child next to him.
I don't believe that for a second.
So she was complaining that her hands were tingling because her bindings, she was tied up and they're too tight. So he adjusted the bindings to make them a little looser, and he just drove around wondering what he had done and what he should do next. So then he drove off to the side of the road and he got stuck in the ditch.
Mm-hmm.
And once he realised that he couldn't get the car out, he took Polly out of the car and he carried her up a steep embankment about 30 yards away. Mm-hmm. And he told her not to move and stay there until he came back.
Right.
Then after that, his story matches the witnesses' account. So everything that I've told you about, Dana, Shannon, the police, all that all matches up.
Okay.
And I mean, I do think that he didn't realise that he was on private property. Mm-hmm. But we'll get to that.
Okay.
So, and at the time that he was talking to the officers, that's when the all points bulletin went out. But unfortunately, these officers were tuned into a different frequency. So, although they were actually out of their car anyway, but even if they had been in their car, they wouldn't have heard it because they were on a different frequency. So, that's unfortunate, isn't it? I mean,
totally. I know, because they had the man there and then.
Exactly. So Davis explained how the officers had pulled his car out and they'd escorted him to the main highway. He then said that he waited for 15 to 20 minutes and then he turned around and went back to Dana's property to find Polly. He put her back in the car and drove her around again, but at some point he realised he was going to have to get rid of her because he didn't want to get put in prison for kidnap. So he killed her. So he took the officers to where Polly's body was. Mm-hmm. He led them to a field near a lumber mill, which was about 40 miles away from Dana's property. Mm-hmm. And they found her under some boards of wood. She was wearing a nightie that had been pulled up under her arms. She had underwear on. Near her body, there was a piece of cloth and a bit of rope which had hair on it. They couldn't determine the cause of death because she was very decomposed.
Right.
But they figured it was strangulation, judging by the rope and the cloth.
Yeah.
So the autopsy report said that Polly's skull had separated from her body after death. She hadn't been decapitated. It had been after death. It was separated.
Like an internal decapitation.
What do you mean by that?
Have you heard of an internal decapitation?
No.
Well, it's when, basically your head is obviously still attached to your body, but you obviously have, you just come off the top of your skeleton or whatever.
Is that not, external as well, then? Because your head's outside your body. Well, it's not outside your body, but you know what I mean?
But that's what they call it.
I don't know. I like how you tried to sound smart there, and I'm just like, I don't know, so I don't know if you are being smart or not, but I'll give you that.
I am.
Okay, you're being smart, because
But it's a thing.
Okay. But that's what had happened anyway. Her skull had separated from her body after death. Her hair was there, but that had been separated from her skull. She was partially mummified, and the rest was skeletal remains. There was no organs left or anything, and they did find semen on her clothing. Mm-hmm. The trial was held in 1996, and after 10 weeks in the courtroom, a jury found Davis guilty of kidnapping, robbery, burglary, murder, and attempting to commit a lewd act on a child. He was sentenced to death, and he's still on death row at San Quentin prison. Okay. So the police don't totally believe Davis' account of the night, because remember, everything that I've just told you there, that was his account.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they think that he killed Polly on Dana's property.
Okay.
In the woods, because that's where the items were left. Mm-hmm. And also, they didn't believe that Polly would have just sat there and waited for her kidnapper
No.
to come back and get her. Like, surely, obviously, she would have been absolutely petrified.
Yeah, of course.
She was only 12 years old, but surely, it's unlikely that she would stay put. She might have been in that much shock or whatever. She might have stayed put.
But you think that she might have ran and tried to...
The police think that, she would have made a run for it. And he had said that he had let her go to the toilet at a gas station at one point, but neither of them were seen by anybody. There were no witnesses, and they weren't on any surveillance cameras or anything like that. So it's likely, that he killed her. They think that she was already dead before he spoke to the officers.
Right. Yeah.
On Dana's property.
Yeah.
So, and they think that's why he had the leaves in his hair and looked like he'd been rolling around, because he had likely raped and strangled Polly not long before that, like in the woods. So that's why he looked the way that he did.
I would imagine that would be like...
And they think that the woods is probably where he was going to leave Polly, but when he realised it was private property, he went back to get her body and took her to the field where she was found. So that's what I'm saying. I think he's been looking for somewhere to take her, and then he's realised that it's private property. So he has actually killed her there, but then he's like, right, I can't leave her here because it's private property, so he had to take her somewhere else. So during his sentencing, he said the most horrific thing. He said, quote, "I would also like to state for the record that the main reason I know I did not attempt any lewd act was because of a statement the young girl made to me walking up the embankment. Just don't do me like my dad. If I have to pay my dues, so should you." So basically he was saying that Polly's dad had been raping his own daughter. Like,
that's awful. What
the actual hell? Like, because basically the reason they think, everybody thinks that he said this was because he knew that there was evidence that she was sexually assaulted, so he tried to put that on her own dad because he was going to prison and he knows what's going to happen to paedophiles in prison. I'm like, sure, child murderers get treated the same way. So I don't know how you thought that was going to be any better. But I think he didn't. I think everybody thinks that he didn't want people thinking that he was a paedophile. So he's blamed it on her dad. That's how despicable is that? Totally. Absolutely disgusting. I think the dad went for him in court.
I'm not surprised.
And actually, because that statement is actually on video. Right. I've seen a clip on YouTube, and you can hear sobbing in the background, which I think was Polly's grandmother, like her dad's mum. Yeah. Because her granddaughter has been murdered, and
you're now trying to say that.
And then you're trying to say that your son has,
that's awful.
That is. So, since Polly's death, the way missing persons cases are handled has changed forever. So, something came out of it. Law enforcement databases are now linked to the different agencies, providing vital information to multiple jurisdictions. Because I said, with them being different places, that's why information wasn't getting through. The all points bulletins, they're now sent out over all police channels. So it doesn't matter what you're tuned into, you're going to get it. But even then, they still might not have heard it, because if they were outside of the car, they might not have heard it. But at routine pullovers and traffic stops, officers can now access not only driving histories, but criminal records as well, because they could get his driver's record, but because his driver's record was clean,
if they managed to get his
criminal record, then they could have seen, oh, wait a minute, I think we need to hold on to this guy.
Yeah, totally.
Or I suppose they didn't know that somebody had been abducted back
then,
I guess not. I don't know.
It might have made them connect to later, sooner.
Or sooner, yeah, of course. But also implementation of the 3 strikes you're out legislation was a direct result of this case. So basically, if a felon has been previously convicted of 2 violent crimes, the 3rd time they'll get a life sentence.
Right.
So basically they're saying because he had been in and out of prison before with with kidnapping, violent crimes. Yeah. So the 3rd time that he should have, you're in for life, that's it.
That's true,
your 3 lives are up kind of thing, which is good. There's a foundation that was established in Polly's name to help search for missing children. You can report a missing child, you can look at the missing children's list, you can make a donation as well. They help and make and distribute missing posters, there's counselling available and much more. So I mean, there's loads more than that, you know, but I'll link the website in the show notes. So that's www.pollyclass.org. And then Polly's dad set up the Klaas Kids Foundation, which is a non-profit organisation. Also, they do a lot of stuff for missing children and all the rest of it. It looks amazing. So I'll link that website as well. So that's www.classkids.org. Look at the show notes, it'll be there. Don't listen to me. And lastly, after Polly's death, Winona Ryder, she starred in the film Little Women, and she dedicated it to Polly's memory because that had been Polly's favourite book.
Aww.
How nice, eh?
That is nice, yeah.
So, that was a bit of a doozy, but
yeah.
Thank you everybody for listening. If you would like to follow us on social media, on Twitter and Instagram, we are crime_divers_pod. Our email is crime_divers_pod@outlook.com. We're on TikTok and YouTube, Crime Divers Podcast. Buy me a coffee if you'd like to just, buy us a coffee. It's buyusacoffee.com/crimedivers. And if you'd like to join our Patreon for bonus episodes, early access episodes, ad-free episodes, it's patreon.com/crimedivers.
And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.